I'm Dave from boyinaband.com, and welcome to day 2 of the 7-day song on Progressive House, sponsored by Filter.com, the tag-based events search website with a name that ends in UH, kinda like gangster, therefore it's awesome. Yesterday in day 1 we built ourselves a sweet beat for our progressive epic, and today we'll be making a crisp, dirty bass sound to give the track an intense focal point for the drops, and that also functions as a sweet electro-ish lead synth, along with a simple sub-bass to beef up those lows for a subwoofer-friendly experience. Now, this is going to be quite a scary bass to make. Even though these kinds of basses tend to sound quite simple, it can take a deceptively long time to make them filled out enough to really have a presence in the track. Otherwise, you'll end up with a weedy little bass drowned out by our awesome percussion, and no one wants that. So, first things first, Combinator, name it, mixer, and our first instance of Thor. Yep, this will have multiple instances of Thor. Initialize it, open it up, and let's get 2 analog oscillators on the go, just for now, and run them through into the filter, without the filter. Turn the sustain here to full, just so it doesn't lose any volume over time, and I'll add in some notes now. Okay, so there we've got some notes in, and I'll just solo this out. Just so you know, I'll discuss the notes I choose in detail on day 6 of this tutorial, so if you're interested in the musical side of the track as well as the production side, be sure to check that out. So, we take a listen, we have 2 oscillators, just going on there. Let's bring one of them down an octave, so we have a 2-octave spread. And you'll hear we have a nice strong basis for a dirty bass tone. And at the moment the top end is a bit higher than the bottom though, so let's bring the mixer balance towards the lower octave saw. Just a little bit. Without the top end, too bassy, and with it, just makes it nice and thick. Now for a bit of tone shaping. Turn on the shaper, switch it to hard clip mode, and then bring the drive up to just above a half. Now this just adds in a tiny nice bit of distortion that brings out the top end of the sound. You'll start to notice this trend a lot in bass-heavy dance music, where the basses function as both a bass and a lead. Just because it's a bass, don't make the mistake of ignoring all the high and mid frequencies or it'll sound very thin. So we have our main sound. Let's bolster it up by running a non-distorted version of the sound through as well. So 1 and 2 through into filter 2 here, and take a listen as I add it in. There, best of both worlds, with the top end of the distorted tone and the pleasant punch of the relatively clean tone. Now it sounds pretty cool, but it's still kinda lacking. It's not as big as it deserves to be. So, taking a leaf from Metal Production's book, which is a very, very disturbing read by the way, we're going to make a nice wall of sound here and put 2 more instances of this synth, panned hard left and right to really widen the sound. But it wouldn't be much use if it was just the same sound, so we're going to shape the sounds with a bit more high-end distortion. So, let's start by duplicating this Thor instance. And then before we make the 3rd instance, there's one little change to make. Inside this instance that we're panning, we're going to take out the low end. Panning low frequencies ends up with very messy results, so we're going to keep the deeper end of this synth in the center and only pan this distorted version of the top by turning filter 3 to state variable, hit high pass, and get rid of the envelope entirely. So it's purely the low end, and as we bring down this frequency, if I solo it out, also link it up, that might help. Hit tab to look at the back, audio output into a spare channel in the mixer, and solo it. As I bring this frequency down, you can hear it's just the top end there. If we take out the state variable mixer, you can hear the low end creep back in. Now this has another useful side effect that I'll talk about in just a second, but for now let's add a Scream 4 distortion unit. Right click, create Scream 4 distortion. And let's turn it to warp mode, which has a really nice distortion to it, as you can hear. Without and with. Just by multiplying a distorted version of the signal with itself. In fact, a lot of the coolest synth tones come from multiplying sounds together. Yay, maths can be fun! So, turn the cut and body off. And we have a nice tone. Now listen to the tone when we take off that state variable filter. Ugh, horrible and muddy, no crispness at all. If you distort a low-frequency sound, it generally ends up as horrible mud rather than frickin' sweet power. And as Genghis Khan's reanimated corpse would tell you, power is frickin' sweet. And also you have a 0.5% chance you're related to him. He must have been a really nice guy for that many women to have wanted to have his kids. Anyway, put that filter back on before you incur the wrath of an 800-year-old Mongolian warlord, then duplicate both devices. If we show programmer to hide the programmer, and hold Ctrl-Shift to select, right-click, duplicate devices and tracks, that duplicates them both quickly. And let's link it all up. In the screen 4, into a spare slot in the mixer up here. Then let's pan them hard left and right. Lovely jubbly. I just had a horrible realization that jubbly is probably not a real word. What a travesty. But yeah, you can pan them in the mixer, or on the Thor devices themselves. For some reason, this yields slightly different tonal results. I kind of like the crispness of the mixer version, but take a listen to what happens if you pan it in Thor, right, and left. Get rid of this panning. And then if we pan it the other way, yeah, the mixer one's definitely bigger. Now, let's turn this kind of muddy sound into a huge dirty bass. This will take a lot of EQing, so let's make a couple of M-class EQs to play with. Right-click, create, M-class EQ. And make sure you hold Shift when you create them so it doesn't automatically link up to anything. I'll just put these in position at the top. And let's link them up. So from the output of the mixer into equalizer 1, into equalizer 2, then back into the combinator. Now with this first one, we're going to carve out some of the muddiness that gathers in the low end. Not too much or you'll lose all the power, but I think if we turn it on and turn it all the way down to about 330 Hertz, take a listen. You can hear all that mud sitting there, especially if we widen this to about 3Q. So if we cut that tiny amount, about 3 or 4 decibels, that can't do any harm. Next up is the high mids around 2.5 kilohertz. And since it's next up, let's bring it up 2.5 kilohertz by a nice 9 decibels. And make it nice and wide. 1.4Q there. So that brings up those high mids nicely. However, on that peak just at the top, you could hear it turn pretty piercing. So in the next EQ, if I point that out to you, just around 2.5, if we bring it up, you can hear that sound there. So if we bring it down a tiny amount, about 5 decibels, hear the difference? It just removes that irritating high pitch that had accumulated. And then lastly, just to brighten the whole thing nicely, I'll use param 2 just to raise the highs around 12 kilohertz by about 7 decibels and 1Q. And you can hear without and with how much brighter that is. Now you might think you may as well use the high shelf to do this, but take a listen to an equivalent usage if we turn off param 2 and put on high shelf, bring up the gain, let's bring that frequency down a bit, and bring up that Q to about the midpoint. If we take a look here, it looks very similar in the graph, as you can see, but take a listen to the sound. Here's the high shelf. And here's param 2. Looks the same in the graph, but still sounds very different because of this tiny bit at the end where you can see in param 2 it tends to go down, whereas in the high shelf it goes up a little bit. Just goes to show how much that tiny bit of highs can change a sound when there's a lot of stuff going on up there. Distorted sounds tend to do that. So if we stick to param 2 for now. So, we have a nicely shaped sound. Let's tidy it up with a maximizer. Right-click, create, M-class maximizer. Let's take off the limiter. Full input. With Then bring that soft clip all the way up to full as well. Remember, soft clip makes things sound loud without actually peaking, and with it being on full, it adds a nice warmth to the tone, as you could hear. So that just stops the highs from being too piercing and brings up those mids. Phew, there's the basic basis of our bass. Join me in part 2 where I'll make it pump with some sidechain compression and break all the laws of musical physics when I turn it into both a bass and a lead synth simultaneously. See ya!